Hello, everybody. So, this is my little DIY Mars rover type of car. It is a hybrid mongrel of a thing in every sense of the word. It originally started out as an AliExpress brushed 4x4 car, and I've changed the ESC to a PWM ESC, and now I have installed inav onto it. And to be honest, it hasn't been without its issues, which I'll briefly touch upon. On the top, I have a little makeshift sled with an Ascent GT Pro VTX and a GM3 gimbal, and it's powered off of a battery strapped to the back. I want this car to be a test rig for all manner of things, so I want it to be, as I say, a hybrid mongrel where I can take the sled off and replace it with a sled with, say, Avatar VTX on it, or even just put the original little shell back on. That's the way. Put the shell back on and just run it as a standard kind of line of sight RC car. So the first thing really to say is inav. The idea was to kind of set it up with some automation. The problem is, although inav can now use a GPS on its own and not require a compass, that's kind of okay when you've got a plane or a drone that's in the sky with lots of space around, where a meter here or 2 meters there doesn't really make much of a difference. But on a car, 2 meters could be kind of on the road, in the curb, on a grass verge, and dead kind of thing. So I've been playing around with the compass GPS, and unfortunately, because this is a brushed car, and not only that, because it's a dual motor brushed car, there's so much noise being created by those motors that with everything turned off, that GPS gets around 20 odd satellites fairly quickly, and as soon as you start driving, it drops to maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of satellites, and the compass is just all over the place. So unfortunately, I've had to start running it without the compass, which means GPS accuracy is ridiculous, which means I can't really use it for automation. My original plan was kind of for return to home, breadcrumb following kind of stuff, waypoints, and I just don't think that's going to happen. So the GPS is up there, and it doesn't really matter whereabouts I kind of put it. It's too close. It's not accurate enough to be running on a rover. So we've had to drop that, unfortunately. The little flight controller's down in here. It's one of those super cheap, super small flying RC, what are they, F405 kind of things. I mean, it is super tiny. I mean, like, there's my finger in beside it for scale. I mean, it's tiny. And on the first setup, I kind of thought this is going to be super simple. I've set up dozens of planes, quads on inav. Been running inav for 6 years or something now. This I thought would be super easy, but it wasn't, because the ESC that I have underneath this battery running those motors, for whatever reason, in inav will not initialize no matter what I've done. When it's set up as a motor, it just doesn't initialize. So I've actually had to set up the ESC signal as if it was a servo. So as far as inav is concerned, there's no actual motor running on this thing. It's just a flight controller with 2 servos. And with that setup, it initializes perfectly fine and is perfectly drivable. And it means that I can use the PWM model that I have on my radio to drive this thing. So where normally they say with inav, don't mix radio settings with inav, let inav do everything. This is an absolute hybrid of a thing where it's got inav doing some of the stuff. I have OpenTX settings doing other mixes there. So yeah, it's a complete mess of a thing. So it's basically set up as 2 servos, and then the channels are just mapped. The outputs are just mapped as RC channels, and then the mixing is kind of mostly done on my radio. So the main thing that this is kind of doing now, I suppose, is giving me full GPS OSD. I've actually set up a inav logic condition that when I arm, it puts everything into just manual mode. So the signal is for the steering, and the ESC is literally just being passed straight through. I did try it with stabilized kind of steering, hoping that would maybe help me along with these little wheels bumping over stones and things, and it does kind of veer all over the place. And to be honest, inav in that situation was just more of a hindrance than a help. So I've just gone straight pass through, and that's where I do extra mixes and things on the radio then. What else have I done? Yeah, lots of logic conditions then for this, because the motor is set up as an ESC. In the event of a fail-safe situation, inav would normally cut power to the throttle to the motor, but this isn't running a motor. This is running 2 servos in inverted commas. So I've had to do lots of logic conditions for when LQ from the receiver, which is up here, goes to 0, then logic conditions kind of activate to set the channel that this is on to its midpoint 1500 US, which basically centers the servo, which on a car that has forward and backwards driving stops it. And on my radio I've set up kill switches and things. So there was a lot of jiggery hookery pokery in inav, which I'll show you go up onto the screen. One thought that I did have was running the Express LRS in S bus and then letting it send no pulses from the radio to kill this. But when I set my receiver to S bus in the little web UI, for whatever reason, it then ESC got stuck, or the receiver got stuck in bootloader mode, and then I had to spend a whole day trying to get it out of bootloader mode. When I was trying different targets for this little clone flight controller, it got stuck as well. It wouldn't go into DFU mode, so I had to spend a whole day troubleshooting that. So it's a little build that has not been without its problems, but it works now. I can plug this in and get full inav OSD on whatever flight controller I plug into the top. I can just run this kind of pigtail in there and just power up a VTX on the top without bothering with the whole inav stuff, and just use the Lua and the telemetry to keep an eye on what inav is doing. So yeah, this is just my absolute bastard of a car, mix of all sorts. It's a mongrel DIY thing, but it works. It'll do. Okay, so this is how we have it set up in inav, and I'm using inav 8.0.1 because it's one of the versions of inav where I could get an official target. I tried it with inav 9, I tried it with inav 7 using official, in inverted commas, targets, and eventually I've just settled on inav 8 because it was the last one that I flashed and it worked, so I'm sticking with it. As you can see, there's no motor set up in the mixer. The way things are set up is 2 banks of servos. I have my steering set up on S1 on the flight controller and the ESC set up on S3 on the flight controller. The extra servo points are really for me to plug in other servos for pan and tilt, and I've done just that with S4 when I'm using one of my other little sleds that has a standard pan servo camera on it. I think that's with an Avatar V3 Nano VTX. It means I can just plug that servo in, and on my radio use the yaw stick to look left and right. So down in the mixer then I've got it set up for yaw sticks. Roll I'm using for left and right for the steering, and pitch you'll see there is on servo 3, which I said was for my throttle. Now the reason for that is because when I had the ESC set up as a motor, it wouldn't initialize. When I had it set up as a servo with RC throttle or stabilized throttle in there, it wouldn't initialize, even though I have my outputs set for reversible ESC, which is what it is. So for whatever reason, I couldn't get the ESC to initialize unless I was basically using a stick position that naturally wants to be at exactly 1500 US, which, as you can see, they're all sitting with the car off at their natural positions. So this is the only way that I could get the ESC to initialize, and what it meant then is that I had to just remap the channel map here and do some jiggery pokery with OpenTX so everything aligns. Now I use the model on my radio that I'm using here on my other PWM cars, and they're all set up really straightforward. Steering in S1, throttle in S3, and everything works. So on my radio, S3 is the throttle, but in here, S3 is the yaw. I'm sure there's reasonable explanations for why this doesn't work or why this works. I got this to work for me, and it carries across with my other PWM cars. I like to have just one model that does my planes, one model that does all my quads, one model that does all my cars. Just keeps things nice and straightforward. But this works, so I'm going with it. And it didn't matter whether I had this switched on, switched off, whether I had this switched on, switched off. No matter what way I had it set up as the ESC connected to a motor, even with this kind of throttle stick yaw thing workaround, it just wouldn't work. So this is the way I've had to do it. Now, because there's no motor connected, or at least inav doesn't see a motor connected, it sees just a bank of servos. It meant then for arm switches or for fail safes, I had to go into the logic conditions and basically set up some conditions where if arm is not active, it automatically sets channel 2, which is my throttle, to 1500, and the same for when the uplink LQ also hits 0. It resets and changes my throttles to 1500. It basically neutralizes the servos, meaning that the servos go to 0. Yeah, pitch channel 2, which is my throttle. So yeah, it basically just sets that all up so it all works. I'm sure there's right ways to do this, wrong ways to do this, and I've kind of done a little bit of both. This car isn't an example of how to do this. It's me just messing around, keeping the mind active, and using it as a learning experience. And I may well move the flight controller onto a different car, brushed setup, which will hopefully just work, or buy another car, bigger car, and put the whole kit into something a bit bigger. But anyway, this is just how I did it. It works.